Hello, everybody. Hello. Let me adjust my camera just a little bit. All right. Oh, now I'm a little discombobulated today. So, welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday. So excited to be jumping on here with you for a cup of coffee with Kristin. We have been diving in and been going through mechanical and kind of tech together over these last weeks of Cup Coffee with Kristin. We have really been diving into, we started with the differential. We looked at the differential, the housing, what was inside, started talking about understanding like gear sets based on the differential. So if you have missed anything, when we get done today, jump back. All the replays are right here waiting for you to get caught back up because this is kind of a progression. I am a big system person. I am a big step by step, following a progression, having a plan. I'm a syllabus teacher. Yeah, that's me. So all of this builds on itself. So if you have missed anything, don't worry. I'm going to send an email out and I'm going to put all of the information in one place, talking about gears, differentials, the front end of your Jeep, making it super easy. But if you have missed anything when we get done today, make sure to jump over and make sure you catch back up so you haven't missed anything. I don't want to be small yet. Let's see. There we go. All right. Hello, everybody. So, welcome to our weekly cup of coffee with Kristin, where we jump on. We have our caffeine fix and our Jeep fix so that we can dive in and be talking about Jeep education and knowledge together on one specific focus. So, I try to keep these 30 minutes or less. Some of them are going to go a little bit over, especially with how in depth we're going to be going, which is why I'm talking a little fast. Could be the caffeine too. So, we're going to dive right in and get started. So, we are going to be continuing in this series together. We are going to be talking all about gears. Woohoo! Today, we are focused on the gear ratio. We kind of started talking about it last week, but we are diving in. And you hear a lot of talk about gear ratios, especially when going to a bigger tire on your Jeep and looking at what gear ratio you have. We're going to talk about that today, and what gear ratio you need to regear to. We're going to talk about that today too. So I feel like the most commonly talked about aspect of owning a Jeep can be, you'll hear, well, what gear ratio do you have? Where are you starting? If you go to put a bigger tire on, you know you're going to have to re-gear, change your gear ratio. So let's dive in and let's really look at the gear ratio. Let's talk about it. Let's get a deeper understanding together today. Because remember, knowledge builds confidence. So if you are new here, I'm excited that you're jumping on with us today. Hello, I'm an excited Kristin DeLibero today from LadyJeepers.com, and I help Lady Jeepers, so women who own Jeeps, to safely enjoy their Jeep on the trail and customize and design their Jeep so that they can confidently create a life of adventure without fear. And I do that using our Confident Trail system, our courses, our education, our in-person events, our private consultant, and our Jeep concierge services. Yes, we have you covered on every aspect. So while we are jumping on here today, I love seeing you ladies commenting. Let me know where you are watching from. I love to know where you are joining from. That really helps me to know where in the country and also what state we have the most of you amazing ladies on. So, hello. I love that you're jumping on here today. So, again, let me know where you're watching from as we continue to go through all of this talk about gear ratios together today. All right, we're just going to dive right in and let's get this out of the way. the most commonly asked question. And I want to talk about it right now here at the beginning because this is what I get asked the most. And I feel like this is probably the most common question. Do I need to re-gear when I go to a bigger tire? I hear that a lot. If I'm going to put a bigger tire on my Jeep, do I really need to re-gear? Yes. The answer is yes. And we're going to dive in today so that you understand why that answer is yes. Not just me sitting here telling you that the answer is yes, but let's look at why the answer is yes. So, first off, how do I know what gear ratio I am starting at? So, like if you are going to go put a bigger tire on your Jeep, you need to know where your starting point is. So, how do you know what gear ratio that you have, that you're starting with, that is in your Jeep right now? Well, first of all, great news. If your Jeep is stock or you bought your Jeep brand new, you can either look on the window sticker or if you get underneath your Jeep, and this is actually kind of fun, get underneath your Jeep and you're going to be looking for stamped on the differential itself is going to be your gear ratio. So as long as you bought your Jeep brand new, you would know from the window sticker or what the factory specs are, what gear ratio you have. I'm going to get small for a minute so you can see it better. There we go. What gear ratio you have in your Jeep. Now, what if you bought your Jeep used? So you don't know what has been modified. You don't know if somebody re-geared it. You don't know what changes have been made to your Jeep. And that is fair. Like when you buy a used Jeep, you don't always know exactly what has been done. So we are going to talk about there are two different ways that you can tell for yourself and know what gear ratio you have in your Jeep, especially if you bought it used. That way, you'll know for sure what your starting platform is, what gears you have in your Jeep, because we're going to be talking about how tire size and gears go together today as we're talking gear ratios. So you want to know what you have because then you'll know if you need to change or what tires you can run on your Jeep with the gears that it currently has before you need to re-gear. So, first way that you can check is a gear ratio test. So, safely jack up the rear end of your Jeep and put it on jack stands. Remember safety first. You're always going to chalk your front tires. I recommend because you're going to be using a jack to lift the rear end up, chalk in front of and behind both front tires. Is that overkill? It is, but there's no such thing as overkill when we're talking about safety. So make sure that you have wheel chocks before you do anything. Chalk in front of and behind both of your front tires. Make sure you have the correct jack to use with your vehicle. Safety first. Make sure you have the correct jack stands. So make sure you have the correct weight jack stands when you go to do this exercise. If you need reviews on any jack safety, we have that available because remember, safety, safety, safety first. So let's jump into the actual exercise. You're going to jack up the rear end of your Jeep. You're going to put jack stands underneath it. And of course, carefully when you're securing your Jeep on jack stands. Do not ever sacrifice safety. Then you are going to take either a piece of tape or a brightly colored Sharpie because you really want to make sure to do this step as we're doing this. I've had people say, oh, you can just eyeball it. You don't have to have a piece of tape or a pen. We want to make sure this is a surefire way. We don't want any room for error. So make sure you're going to mark your tire. So you're just going to put a piece of tape or again, a brightly colored Sharpie mark on your tire in any location. Then you are going to put a piece of tape or mark on your drive shaft with a brightly colored Sharpie. So you want to make sure those marks are going to be easy to see because you want to make sure that you do this again correctly. So you're going to have to be able to see those marks on the tire, see those marks on your drive shaft. Once you have made those marks, I recommend having a second person if you're going to be doing this exercise. I feel like there's room for error if you are rotating your tire and counting the rotations on the drive shaft at the same time. There is some room for error there. I recommend having two people for this exercise. So one person who is just focusing on the tire rotation, one person who is just going to be focusing on counting the rotations of the drive shaft. So here's the exercise itself. You are going to rotate the tire one full rotation. That's why you have it marked. What I recommend to make it easy is take that mark and get it dead center at the top of the tire. Then you're going to concentrate on just a full rotation. So watch one full rotation, stop when that mark is at the same spot. While that tire is rotating one full rotation, someone else is going to be counting how many times your drive shaft turns. So this exercise, rotate the tire one full rotation, at the same time counting how many full rotations of the drive shaft. And when we're talking about gear ratios, sometimes it's not a full rotation. So notate, take a note, make sure that you are paying attention. How many times and how much rotation is there on that drive shaft? So once you have that, then you are going to say, let's say, for example, my drive shaft rotated 4.5 times for the one tire rotation. That would mean I had a 450 gear ratio. So that would be a 456 gear ratio in my Jeep. So again, that's how you would calculate it. For how many times the drive shaft turns for one full tire rotation, that is going to be your gear ratio. So let's say you rotate the tire one full time and the drive shaft turns 3, and I'm not really good at fractions. So let's say it goes tiny bit more. This isn't going to be an exact science. Let's use a tape measure, which you can do that as well, so that you know for sure. Are we talking about a 321? Is it almost a full half rotation? So we're in the 340s. This is how you're going to know what gear ratio you have. If you want it spot on, use a tape measure. When you measure that partial rotation, that is going to give you whatever that extra number is. So you might say, okay, it rotated 3 full rotations and then about a 3/4 turn. Measure that. That would be maybe your 3.73. So use that tape measure to get that actual secondary ratio when you are doing this. That is one way. Another way, when we were talking about knowing what gears you have in your Jeep, if you don't know, you can count the teeth on the gears themselves. So let's say you're doing a differential service or having a differential service done on your Jeep. The easiest way, if you're going to pull that diff cover off anyway, if you pull the diff cover off and have access to those gears, we have shown examples of that over our last couple classes. So once that cover is off, you're going to see your ring gear, which is the big gear, your pinion gear, which can be a little bit harder to see, that is coming in the back. So you will go ahead and you're going to count the number of teeth that are on your ring gear. Again, I recommend having either like the notes up on your phone, having a piece of paper and a pen, something to write stuff down. If you are like me, I may think I'm going to remember, like I'll remember how many teeth were on the ring gear. Well, then when I start counting the pinion gear, I forget what the ring gear number was, and then I have to recount. So I recommend always plan ahead, be prepared, write everything down, because we're trying to alleviate any chance of error as we're doing these exercises. Then go ahead and count the teeth on the ring gear. Pinion gear. So you've started with the ring gear, then you're going to count the number of teeth on your smaller pinion gear. Once you have both numbers written down, this is how you get your actual gear ratio. So you are going to take the number of teeth from the ring gear. So your big ring gear you counted first. You're going to take that number, write it down on your piece of paper. Divide that number by the number of teeth that there were on your smaller pinion gear. So it'll be big ring gear number divided by small pinion gear number. That is going to give you your exact gear ratio as well. So if you have a used Jeep and you're not sure, you don't know if it's been regeared, those are two surefire ways that you can know for sure and find out what gear ratio is currently in your Jeep. Again, I recommend having a second person if you are going to do the tire and drive shaft rotation to count. If you're going to do it off the teeth themselves of your ring and pinion gear, make sure to write it down. That is always super helpful. And don't forget, it is the big number, big ring gear. Then you're going to divide that by the small pinion gear number. So ring gear divided by small pinion gear, and that gives you the gear ratio that is in your Jeep as well. So I wanted to share that starting with knowing what number gear ratio you are starting with. Because let's look at the gear ratios. The most common, and I know I'm mostly talking JK, JL, JT Gladiator generation here when we're talking about this. So this is kind of the most common gear ratios when we are talking about the kind of newer generation Jeeps. If you have a CJ, a YJ, a TJ, an LJ, we have our generations training that goes in depth into what gears are in there as well. And I will talk a little bit about that. Older generation Jeeps, engines and transmissions played a part in what gear ratio was in that vehicle. So again, especially if you have an older generation Jeep, you don't know what modifications have been made to it, where it is a little bit older year. So I recommend, unless it is bone stock and has never been touched, always know your gear ratio for yourself. So when we're talking about gear ratios, these are the numbers. So we're just going to go through this for a minute. These are actual gear ratio numbers. So 321, 345, 373, 410, and 456. Now let's talk about where those were the most common too. So if your Jeep is bone stock, do remember Jeep like to make things confusing for us. So depending on the packages and depending on your additional upgrades, that can change axles, that can change gear ratios. So do keep that in mind. So I always recommend make sure you have your Jeep build sheet, your Windows sticker, know for sure what is in your Jeep. So there it is definite if you haven't made any changes yet. But let's just talk about generalized what came in the Jeeps. So in your JKUs, for your sports, for your Saharas, for your non-Rubicons without a tow package. Okay. So let's put non-Rubicon. So if you had a sport, if you had a Sahara, some of the limited editions, again, are a little bit different based on the packages. No tow package. You had a 321 was your factory gear that came in your Jeep. That's what it started with. Now, if you have a JL, JLU, you will notice if you have a sport, a Sahara, again, there are some specialty editions that are a little bit different. So they have different gear ratios. You had a 345 is what came stock. Now, if you had a tow package on your JKU, you came with a 373. There was a small period of time that Rubicons could be ordered with a 373 instead of a 410. So if you have a Rubicon in the JKU generation, you need to look to guarantee you have a 410 gear ratio. do not just assume because it was a Rubicon, it was a 410. You gotta love Jeep, right? They gotta make it difficult. They gotta keep us on our toes. So we have to keep learning. Okay. So if you had a JK, JKU, a JLJLU, a Gladiator, a TJ, or an LJ that were a Rubicon, it came with a 410. Exceptions being, there were some instances where the Rubicon and the JK/JKU generation was ordered from the factory by the dealer with a 373. So if you have a JK/JKU that is a Rubicon, double check. Make sure you have the 410, not the 373. If you have a TJ Rubicon, LJ Rubicon, JL Rubicon, JLU Rubicon, or a JT Gladiator Rubicon, those come with 410s. Now I know you're already thinking, wait, but what about the Recon? The Rubicon Recon package. All right. So if you got a Rubicon Recon package in the newer generation Jeeps, you had the option to order it with a 410 gear, a 456 gear, and a 488 gear. You also could upgrade to bigger tires, but so as far as gear ratios go, your 456 can still be a stock gear set in a Rubicon Recon that was ordered as a Rubicon Recon with 456 gears directly from the factory. I know sometimes there's a little bit of controversy, right? You may get different answers on gear ratios. That's why I really wanted to dive into this, because Jeep did some tricky things throughout the different generations and different models. So there is no absolute answer, except for if you have a TJ Rubicon, you have a 410. If you have an LJ Rubicon, you have a 410. That's where it stops. If you have a JL, JLU, JT Rubicon, not a Recon package, you have a 410. So I know this is a whole lot of information. Please don't worry. I'm going to send you the replay on this so you can go back through this. But the reason I'm talking about this is I want you to know what the most common stock gear ratios are so that you know kind of where your stock starting point is in your Jeep. Because as we look at these numbers, okay, so you see I have them in order. You're going to notice as that number gets bigger, so as the gear ratio gets bigger, it's getting deeper. So for example, the 321, when you get to a 373, that is a deeper gear set. So as that number gets bigger, you're getting a deeper gear set. And we're going to talk about what that means. Also keep in mind, like we talked about last week, as that number gets bigger, your ring and pinion gear gets smaller. That doesn't matter what axle you have. As the ring and pinion gear, as that ratio gets bigger, the ring and pinion gear gets smaller. So keep that in mind as well. So what do I mean when I'm talking about a deeper gear? So off-road, you're getting more crawl. You're getting I call it like this deeper crawl, kind of like that growly from your Jeep. But what it really means is it's the number of times the drive shaft turns to one rotation of your tire. So it's just like that exercise. That is what is determined. So if you have a 321 for one rotation of your tire, the drive shaft rotates 3.21. So we're going to say almost a quarter rotation. So what does that have to do with the tires, the gear, the Jeep, any of that? All right. So now we're going to look at this. The deeper the gear, so the bigger the number, that changes the power that is being put out and what RPM the power is being put out at. So the RPM changes. So you're putting out power and giving more power as you start to go from a stop. So for example, if you have a 321 with a stock tire, so we're going to say a stock tire is 30 inches, okay? So you have a 321 gear ratio, 3.21, 321 gear ratio. Stock Jeep has a 30-inch stock tire on it. So we're going to say that's what came with it. That is how it is designed. So when you are at a red light, you go to pull off from that red light and you hit the gas, the RPM to start and to move that stock 30-inch tire from a stop is what is required. Okay, so let's say you have that 3.21. Now, so let's say when you go to put your foot on the gas, I'm just really making up numbers here on this part to explain it. So please don't take this part seriously. But let's say you have 30-inch tires, you have a 321 bone stock, you're at a red light, light turns green, you go to hit the gas. Let's say your RPMs are at 2,000 and you're moving, starting to move. And you get up to, 5 miles an hour, you're at 2,000 RPM and the tires are spinning and you're accelerating, but you're at that great 2,000 RPM, tires are spinning, it's moving. Now, for an example, let's say we put 33-inch tires on that Jeep with the same gear ratio of a 321 or 3.21. We're sitting at a red light. Now we're going to go to pull off of that red light. And your RPMs are at 3,200 RPM, bing, right? RPMs go up. You're going past 2,000, but you're not moving yet. RPMs hit 3, and then the Jeep starts to move and get to 5 miles an hour. So with the lower gear ratio number, when you put the bigger tire on it that it's not equipped for, you're losing your low end, which means your ability to accelerate, your ability to get those tires rotating. It is taking a higher RPM, requires more power from the vehicle, the transmission, the engine, to get the tire moving. Now, if you put a deeper, so bigger number gear ratio in that setup, in that differential with the bigger tire, it keeps the power required from the engine and the transmission and the RPMs balanced. So you're balancing torque and you're balancing power. So when you see a difference, when you start talking about regearing and you see these numbers, there's a mechanical, scientific reason you need to regear so there's balance. Now, could you, for example, have those 30-inch tires, stock Jeep, 321 gears, and happily drive it around? It accelerates, you hit 2,000 RPM and you're accelerating forward. You're at 5 miles per hour. RPMs are still at 2,000. You're good. Then you go to put the 33s on there. Could you drive it around town with those 321 gear set in there with the RPMs required higher? So the power outtake from the engine and transmission that is required is higher, putting more stress on the transmission and the engine of your Jeep to move the tires. Could you do that? You could do that. Do you want to do that long term? No, you do not want to do that long term. So that is why we're going to jump into our next question, which is why we regear. So that right there is the reason, one, of why you want to regear. You are trying to keep a balance in torque, a balance in power required, balance in RPM, what it takes to move the tire by the engine and transmission of your Jeep. The RPMs that your vehicle is going to be at, you want to have that balance of torque, balance of power, balance of your engine and your transmission. That is why you want to regear for on the road. Let's talk about, in my opinion, the second reason you really want to regear your Jeep if you go to a bigger tire, and that is off-road functionality. So not only when we go to a bigger tire, are we thinking about how it's going to drive on road, but let's talk about how it's going to drive off road. Even if you don't ever plan to take it off road, I want you to know what the benefit off road is going to be when you do regear. You're keeping the balance. You're keeping the RPM balance, the torque, the balance of power required, and everything lives harmoniously and happily. And you have a great daily driver and you get to go on awesome trips. Now you're going to take it off road. So by regearing, when you are talking about what you're going to gain off road, when you put your Jeep in for low, you're going to get more low end or crawl ability on the trail. Basically, what that means is you can go slower at the same RPM in for low. So it's allowing you, when you're daily driving, to be at the same RPM, going the same speed with the same tire or the bigger tire size when you regear. Well, off road, you're getting a slower speed at that same RPM in for low. And that is so important if you're talking about your ability to crawl, your ability for your low end while you're in four-wheel drive. So I'm going to do a really quick example of this, just like I did for driving on the road. Let's say you're on the trail. And again, I'm making numbers up as we're talking, so please don't take these literally. I just want to have great examples to help to explain it. So let's say you're on the trail and you're in four low in first gear. So first gear if you're in a manual, or manual mode 1 if you're in an automatic. So you're getting your four low and then your first gear reduction. Let's say instead, so before you regeared, let's say you were 321 gears on 30s. Now you went to, let's say, 35s and regeared to 456s. So you're balanced. So instead of going, let's say, 7 miles an hour at 1500 RPMs, now you're going 5 miles an hour at 1500 RPMs. So basically, you're getting the same 1500 RPMs, but instead of when you're at 1500 RPMs, you're at 7 miles an hour. Now you're going slower. So at your 1500 RPMs, you're going 5 miles an hour. That might not sound like a big difference, but it really does make a difference when you go to regear and you get that low end and you can be going a slower speed at your same or higher RPM, because this is especially important if you're talking about a manual. Why? I talk a lot about stall points and knowing your stall points. So when you talk about regearing, the deeper that gear is, that is going to change your stall point. So let's say, I know I'm going really in depth today, but let's say your stall point, for example, let's say you have, I know Rubicons are a little different, so I'm just going to pick one here. Let's say you have a Sport. Let's say, again, you have 30-inch tires, 321s on it, and it stalls as soon as RPMs go below 900. So if the RPMs drop below 900, Jeep is stalled. Bink, turns off. Stalled, dead. Have to recrank it, get going again. Now, let's say you regeared to a deeper gear set, and let's say you kept the 30-inch tires on there, but you regeared it to, let's say, a 373, which is a little overkill, but we're going to say that. Now, all of a sudden, your RPMs can drop all the way to, say, 700 before you're going to be stalling. It requires less gas to keep the vehicle moving forward at the RPM with a deeper gear. So I always recommend, if you are a manual, absolutely regear to the correct gear set. It is going to make the biggest difference in the world on the trail. So that is just my 2 cents as we're talking about regearing today. So what plays a part in what you're going to regear to? Well, like I just talked about a little bit, if you have an automatic versus a manual transmission, that can play a part in what you want to regear to, as well as what transfer case you have. So if you have a Rubicon, you have a 4-to-1 transfer case. We're going to get in depth into that in a separate class because there's a lot that goes into that as well. But depending on what transfer case you have is also going to depend what you want to re-gear to. Does it play a crucial part? No, but when you're talking about trail riding off road, there are times, whether you have an automatic or a manual for off road, what transfer case you have for off road, when you are talking about building more towards the off road capability, drivability side, those are things you're going to take into consideration when you go to rebuild. Now, if you said you wanted to go the direction of performance for on road, daily driver, you don't want to lose top end, you want to be able to be on the interstate driving, going up and down hills. I mean, everything's working great. You go to a bigger tire, but it doesn't drive any different. You want to make sure you keep the great balance, the even balance. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. If you want dual purpose, I recommend keep that balance. Now, if you want dual purpose and you're going to be off-roading, if you have a manual, you may want to think about which one's going to be more important. How fast you can go on the interstate, high speed, max speed, or how it's going to drive while you're on the trail for ease with that manual and the clutch, and how much gas you have to give it, how much power it needs, where the RPMs are going to be, where the stall point is. Those are a little more in-depth, but those are things to consider if you have a manual. Now, if you said, I'm not going to drive it on the road. And if I do, I'll go 20 miles an hour with my hazards on if I have to. I don't care, but I want it to crawl anything and everything on the trail. And I want it to be this rock crawling machine out there that can crawl its way up and over anything. So if you're going the off-road side, you're going to re-gear differently. Today, I'm not going to talk about if you're really trying to think about the manual, if you're only going to the off-road side. Those are a more in-depth conversation that we would have. There are more questions I would ask you. Today, I'm going to share with you the balance. If you want to have your awesome on-road, you want to hit the interstate, you don't even want to know you put bigger tires on there with the way it drives. You want it to feel the same. It's awesome. You pull off the line at the red light. You beat the person next to you if you want to. I'm just kidding. And you can be going 90. I wouldn't recommend that, especially with bigger tires. But all right, let's say nothing has changed. But then when you go off-road, you're going to notice it's better. So balance. So when we're talking about balance today and recommendations, we're talking daily driver, we're talking dual purpose, but we're not going to be talking that full off-road focus today. I consider that more, we go into that in our intermediate level where maybe you want to build a rig for the trail. Today, we're talking about we're re-gearing our daily driver that we may take on the trails and love the difference, and we may not. No judgment there. So what is that sweet spot, that balance that you really want? As we just talked about, torque, output of power that is required, and RPM. We're trying to keep a balance. So we're changing our tires to a 33. Long term for performance and drivability, you want that on a 4:10 gear ratio. So what does that mean? That means if you have a Rubicon with a 410 in it, it can live on 33s for the rest of its life happily. You're not going to feel a difference off the line. To move those 33-inch tires, you're going to feel like it is still balanced. Now, if you want to go to 35s, long term, you need to re-gear to a 456. That way, again, you're keeping that balance of power required, torque, and drivability. And of course, you're going to feel an amazing difference off-road as well. For 37-inch tires, you want to re-gear to a 488. And for 40-inch tires, you want to re-gear to a 513. Remember, I know you might be sitting here looking at this going, wait a minute. This is a balance. This is if you're taking a Jeep that daily drives, goes on trips, is dual purpose. So you drive it to work, you drive it around town, you want it to have great manners, you don't want to be left at the red light, you don't want the RPMs too high, you don't want to put the stress on the engine and transmission, and then it's going to go and perform great and balanced trail riding. This is your magic formula. Now, if you said to me, I want to go to 37-inch tires, but I want a crawling machine that only trail rides, it only goes to the woods, doesn't do anything else. I want a rock crawl. You're going to go deeper than the 488. You're going to go to the 513. So there are some fluctuations. I'm sharing with you the balance, the starting point of if you want a dual purpose vehicle that you're driving down the road and you enjoy driving down the road. The Jeep enjoys driving down the road. It's not struggling. It's not angry. It's not running hot. You're not putting extra stress on it. You're not getting left by the car next to you at the red light. This is your balance. If you were going to want fuel efficiency, the best fuel mileage that you could get, the absolute best on-road driving that you could get, I would recommend do not go to a bigger tire. So there's balance things, right? If you are only daily driver, will never go on a trail ride, you want the absolute best that you can get out of it, I would not go above a 35-inch tire. That my opinion, I'm just being honest. When we start talking fuel efficiency, when we start talking about drivability, when we start talking about its road manners, when we talk about top end speed, because of the gear ratios, I recommend 35s and below. Now, I daily drive my 37s, but I'm not going to drive on a long road trip on 37s, which I know some of you amazing ladies do. But if you do, you don't really care what your fuel efficiency is. It's miles per mile. So just remember that the fuel efficiency is going to change, but by re-gearing, you're rebalancing. So your fuel mileage is going to be better than if you do not re-gear. I hope that helped. Let's see, 38-inch tires, stay with 488. That's a great question. Couple things I would ask you is what Jeep model you have. So do you have a Rubicon or a non-Rubicon? And the only reason I ask that is because that's going to determine what transfer case you have. Then my next question would be, is it a super aggressive set of 38-inch mud tires? That is going to change a little bit because that is a bigger rotating mass with a bigger lug that's a little more aggressive. Gladiator, Rubicon. You should be okay to stay with 488 for the 38. And here's something when we start talking about tire size to keep in mind. I would measure and see if it's a full 38-inch tire. Some tires, even though they will say like 35 or 37 or 40 or 42, when you take a tape measure to them, they are a little smaller. But yeah, with 38, you could go either direction. You could either go with the 488 or the 513. With the Rubicon, with that 4-to-1 transfer case off-road, you would be just fine on the 37. On-road, it's going to drive a little better on-road with the 513s. You're going to lose some top-end speed, but let's be really honest. With 38s, you're starting to kind of push the line of the bigger tire. So you're probably not going to be able to go 80, 85 down the interstate. So just remember, if you drop to a deeper gear ratio, so a bigger number, you are going to lose some top speed. You're not going to be able to go as fast. So the 488, you're going to keep your top speed. You're kind of right on that borderline of either direction. 513s, you're going to lose a little top speed. You're going to get a little more off the line, a little more low end. So those would be the questions you need to ask and answer for yourself based on how you drive, your driving style, and what you really want to expect from your Jeep. Let's see, TJ Sahara. So going to 35, you would still go with the 456. It's not a daily driver. If it's not a daily driver, I would do 513s. You would have one heck of a fun gladiator on 38s with 513s. Like where it's the Rubicon, when you get that full reduction of the transfer case and the little bit deeper gear, 38s, 513s, Rubicon, nothing's going to stop you. It'll crawl anything until something stops it. You are so welcome. Yes, absolutely. We did touch on that. The bigger the gear ratio number becomes, the smaller the ring and pinion gear becomes, and then the weaker that is. If you missed last week's class where we went in depth on your actual axle, how your axle size dictates your differential size, and then how that directly affects gear ratio. That really highlights really well an understanding of as the gear ratio number gets bigger, the gears get smaller. But we talk about what that means across axles, like a Dana 30, a Dana 44, and a Dana 60, and what those actual gear ratio numbers mean. Why you will hear people say, do not regear, that deep in that axle because the ring and pinion gear gets so small and it is so weak, you're such a high risk to break. So if you miss that, I'm going to shoot an email out and I will put a post up on here too. I'm going to put all of this, since it has been a series, in one place to make it super, super easy to find for you amazing ladies. All right, I'm not quite done yet. Couple more things. So great questions that I've kind of been answering as we're talking about this. When you go to regear, you want to regear for your final tire size platform so that you only need to regear once. This is something, I hound a lot. I talk about so much. I probably sound like a broken record, but I feel like this is so important because you only want to regear once, spend the money once if possible. So here's how I explain it. If you are going to go to 33s, but in the back of your mind, you're like, I kind of like 35, but I'm not ready for 35s. No, you know what? 33s is going to be my ultimate. I don't want to go any bigger. I'm not going to go any bigger. Regear so that you can accommodate the 35. You can run the smaller tire with a deeper gear set. Now, it's not going to be great long term forever, right? Because you're gonna lose a little bit of top end speed. That's really the only thing you're gonna notice. Your gas mileage is gonna be off a little bit, but here's the thing: if the number, whatever the biggest number that has come out of your mouth in conversation or popped into your mind when talking about building your Jeep, if you have thought it or spoke it, it is going to end up there. Or the chances of it ending up there are going to be probable. They're going to be high. So, what I recommend, and I've seen this happen, and if it does, it happens. But what I'm trying to do is set you up for long-term success, save you money, frustration. And there's nothing worse than doing something, paying for it, and then realizing you're going to have to do it again and you're going to have to pay for it again. That's frustrating. So again, less frustration, less money. Whatever the number is that you think or that comes out of your mouth is what you should regear for. Even if you said, well, I'm going to 33s. But in the back of your mind, you keep saying, God, but I do like those 35s. Maybe one day. Nope. I'm going to stay on 33s. Regear for the 35s. That way you can drive it on the 33s. And when the day comes that you're like, I'm getting those 35s, it's ready. You don't have to go back in the differential and regear, pay to do something again, and kind of have that frustration of doing it a second time. So I know and I know this from personal experience of helping you amazing ladies through the build concierge service that we do and doing your builds for you. If you get your Jeeps built at other shops, sometimes they're going to tell you that you do not need to re-gear. That's why we're doing this class today, so that you now know why you need to re-gear, what it means to re-gear, what a gear ratio does, how all of that affects the balance in your Jeep, so that you have that knowledge, that confidence of what you know, and that understanding of, one, I absolutely need to re-gear. Two, if you go, had this happen too, if you go to a shop and say, all right, here's the build list. So we're going to do lift, we're going to do, this lift, we're going to do these shocks, we're going to do this tire carrier, we're doing these tires, we're doing these new wheels. Okay. And then you're going to re-gear to 488. And they go, oh, but you're only putting 35s on it. So you don't only need to re-gear to a 456. No, it's eventually going to go on 37s. So it needs to be re-geared today for the 37s that are eventually going to go on it. So it doesn't have to be re-geared again. Sometimes you do have to push a little bit, but know that you are pushing for your best interest and you're setting yourself up for success. Less frustration, less money spent, and you feel great about your end platform of what you are building and creating with your Jeep. If you ever have any questions, ladies, or go to take your Jeep in to get it built, or putting your build plan together and you have any questions or you get any pushback, please don't hesitate. If you're not in the Lady Jeepers, it's official Lady Jeepers private group. I will share that once we're done with the live today. If you're not already in that group, jump in the group. But if at any time you have any of those come up, please don't hesitate to post in the group. Best thing that you could do is either tag me or Lady Jeepers, or just put in there like, need help with build, and I will jump in and help you. If you have any concerns or you feel like you've been told a little differently, that's what we are here for. So again, official Lady Jeepers private group. I know most of you amazing ladies are in there as I see you on here with me today, but if you're not, jump in there. And again, if at any time you're like, I'm confused, I don't quite understand this person is telling me this person is telling me this, please don't hesitate to post in there so we can help. Back to our class. Okay, I went on a little side tantrum, sorry, but always re-gear for your final tire size platform. I always recommend when you are putting that list together, when you are designing your build for your Jeep, make sure to build it for the ultimate tire size platform. If you're like, I'm just going to go to 33s, maybe one day 35s. No, 33s. No. Yeah, I'm going to say 33s. That makes the most sense. When you do upgrade parts, upgrade them to work with 35s so that down the road, if you hit that day where you're like, my tires are worn out, I'm just going to order 35s, it will work with the 33s or with the 35s. So you don't have to reorder parts. So take the time at the beginning, even if you're going back and forth, pick whatever the bigger tire size is and just make the choices for the parts that will work with the bigger tire size long term, so you don't need to go back in and rebuild things over and over again, change them. We do it anyway. You know, unfortunately, we'll get and then be like, oh, I just want to change this a little bit, or oh, I really wish I had this and it worked a little different. We do it, but the more we can set up front, the more it is going to save us time, effort, energy, frustration, and hassle. So, just to be clear, it costs the same to re-gear unless you have a carrier brake that you need to change the carrier out. That would change the cost. But for the most part, you're not paying any more for a 410 gear ratio set or a 456 or a 488 or a 513. The size of the gear ratio, so the size of the gear set, does not dictate the price. The only thing that may change is depending on what Jeep you have. There may be a carrier brake where you have to take out the old carrier, put a different carrier in so it can handle the different gears. Because remember, as we talked about, the bigger the number, the smaller the ring and pinion gear get, but they still have to line up and be able to work and function properly. So sometimes there is a break and a change in what carrier you have to have so that the gears will work correctly. So as we're talking gear ratios, just remember, if you are, rationally we would think, right? Okay, it's going to cost more to re-gear to a 488 than it would to re-gear to a 410 because it's a bigger gear ratio number, but that is not the case. So when you're looking at re-gearing, it's not going to cost you any different, again, unless you have a carrier brake, which we're going to go in depth into next week. But it's going to cost you the same to re-gear for the 35s or the 37s. So do keep that in mind when you're going to make the choice that is going to be the best for you. So next week, we will be diving into carriers, understanding what a carrier is, understanding what a carrier brake is, when there is a carrier brake. And then we're also going to be talking about the different differential types in depth. So, for example, we're going to be talking about limited slip differentials, and we're going to talk about lockers, and we're going to talk about carriers. So, when we started this cup of coffee with Kristin series, we started it just basically looking at the inside of the differential, talking about the differential, what it was. Then we move forward into talking about gears, so the ring and pinion gear. Then we moved forward into talking about different axles like we did last week. So we talked about the Dana 30, Dana 44, Dana 60, what all of that means, what is different in the different actual axle housings, how that affects the differential, the shape of the differential, and then what that means for the gears that are housed inside. So we've been on a pretty intensive mechanical dive on this journey in this series together. So again, don't worry if you missed any of those previous. They are right here, wherever you are watching from, as replays. So when we get done today, you can jump over, take a look at those, or I'm going to email out. It's going to be tomorrow. I will email. I'm going to put everything together so it's super easy. All of the different class series, since we've done so many, I will email that out to you so you can jump over and you can start at the very first one, work your way all the way through to today's. And it goes again. I am a big system person. I'm like, I like a syllabus to teach off of. I want everything to be progressive. So it definitely is a order of what we are talking about for a reason. So we're building on all of that. So all that will be available for you. I'll email it out. If you're not on our email list, you can jump over ladyjeepers.com when we get done today. Scroll to the very bottom. Join our newsletter. So tomorrow, when I send out all the information, you get the email. So you can jump over and watch all these videos as well. Okay. Before I finish for today, I know I kept you an hour instead of 30 minutes, but when you start talking gear ratios and diving into that, I feel like there's so much important information to cover. So I'm going to answer some questions before we jump off. Let's see. Two-door Rubicon JL on 35s. I haven't re-geared. It's my daily driver. If I move from 410 to 456, what does that do? If I decide to go to 37s at some point, would that still be good? I don't want to overgear. Do I just wait until I get my next tires? Hopefully that helped a little bit answer your question. In a nutshell, we went in depth into what regearing does based on tire size. So if you missed some of it, when we get done, jump back to the beginning with me today. But in a nutshell, so the 410 and 35s on a JL Rubicon, because of the transmission that is in there, you're not putting high stress on your transmission. Are you still requiring more work from the motor and transmission to move the tires? Yes. So it's a little more strain than the stock tires on there. But But again, it's a little different transmission than what is in the older generations, where if you said I had a JK, I'd be like, you absolutely need to regear. JKs do not have the same transmission as the JLs. So there is a difference when we're talking about the I guess the time frame of having to regear. If you have a JL, JLU, JT, you have a different transmission, which means long term, long run, could you do some damage to the transmission? Are you putting more stress on the motor? Is there a chance your Jeep could run hotter, especially trying to go up and down hills when you don't have the correct gear ratio? Because you'll notice it upshifts, downshifts, upshifts, downshifts, or you're going to be at a higher RPM because it's working harder to keep those tires turning at that speed than you really wanted at. Over a long period of time, yeah, that's not good for JL, JLU, JTs either. But over a shorter period of time, 6 months to a year, is the JL, JLU, JTs going to do significant damage to the vehicle? It is always a possibility, so I don't ever want to say no. My opinion is they can go a little bit longer and be okay short term before you regear. Now, if you have anything older than that, you need to regear right away. I'll just share a little opinion here. I feel like there were a lot of transmission issues with the JKU generation. Those transmissions could not tolerate having bigger tires without being regeared for a long period of time because it put a lot of stress on the transmission and the motor was having to work harder. So you saw major transmission issues in the JKU faster when you didn't regear and you put a bigger tire on it because the transmission could not accommodate. Newer transmission is a different transmission than what's in the older ones. Yes, you are still putting stress on a transmission and motor running at a higher RPM. Is it going to be detrimental short term? It should not be. So hopefully that's helpful. So that is such a tough question. Now, you could regear to 488s, knowing that you're going to go to 37s and drive your 35s. It's still going to drive good. Like you're not going to feel so overgeared that you hate it. Now, with that said, if you like to drive really fast, then you're right. You probably should wait until you're going to put the 37s on to then regear it. If you're good at 75, just kind of cruising down the interstate, you don't need to go fast, then you would be fine regearing to the 488s, putting the 35s on it, and driving it until you're ready to put the 37s on it. Again, this is knowing you. And knowing your driving style and figuring out where you will be the happiest, but with a JL and a 2-door, so the Jeep itself doesn't weigh as much as the 4-door and the different transmission, you would be okay if you waited until you go to a 37. However, I would not put the 37s on your Jeep with the 410s. So I would definitely make sure 37s are going on. It is getting regeared. The 410 on 35s is kind of your borderline. If you imagine a range, right? Lowest you could run for it to be happy, but you don't want to be there forever. Perfect in the middle, and then a little too much gear. So imagine there's a range here. The 410 on 35s is like that very low one of it. It could be considered acceptable, but long term, that's not where you want to live. So it's kind of in the range, if that helps to make sense. So you're fine on the 410s and the 35s until you go to 37s. Then absolutely regear. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Natalie, I just saw your comment. What is your question about the front axle? If you don't mind, if you're still on here, Natalie, if you go a little more in depth for me, What is your question about the front axle? I can make sure I get that answered for you. You answered most of my questions after I posted. Yes, I love it when that happens. I understand. I appreciate understanding JL versus JK. Does the V6 versus V4 turbo impact regearing? It does not. Great question, though. No. In these newer Jeeps, the engine does not impact. Okay. In the newer Jeeps, unless you have a diesel or a 392, the gearing is not impacted with the motors. There's not a significant enough difference in the motors. Now, if you have a diesel, that puts out so much torque. You have a totally different low end in it, and it's a totally different functioning motor. If you have the 392, you have so much power. Remember, we're talking about balance with the gear ratio, right? You have so much power that when you think of power required and the balance and the torque, that is all we are keeping balanced on the drivetrain of our vehicle, so that if you think about it, you want everything to work together so that not one thing is working harder than the other. So when we talk about that nowadays, unless you have, I'm talking stock. I'm not talking about motor swaps and Hemi swaps and all these things. Stock, okay? What came in the vehicle when it was bought? The only stock motors that are going to make any difference in your regearing is a diesel, because it totally functions differently when you're talking about RPMs, torque, power, and the 392. Because again, we're talking power, balancing torque, and RPMs. So again, those are the only two that are a big or significant enough difference that they would require a change. I will be 100% honest. The 4XEs, there has not been enough. The 4XE has not been out long enough. The 4XE has not had enough actual studies done on it yet. There are some companies who I'm going to say are a little more 4XE masters than others that have put more time, more effort into testing, doing their own testing, really experimenting with the 4XEs. So if you have a 4XE, I always say I don't know enough about the 4XE to give you the best advice possible. I know how they function generally. They are different because, again, we're talking about balancing. When it kicks into the battery mode, it's so they produce a little more low end because of the being electric, like the way the motor. It's just a little different. So I'm 100% honest. I never say that I know something if I don't know. So if you have a specific 4XE question, I can give you general answers, but I am not 100% sure yet on anything. My only experiences have been what I have experienced with the 4XEs personally. So if you have questions, I can tell you about some different experiences, different tips, different things we have learned on the 4XE. But as far as building and modifying, most companies don't make parts yet. There are a couple who have started to venture in the 4XE world. I will say, as of right now, there is not a flash system or taser system that has been created that will work with the 4XE computer program system. For that reason, it is recommended you do not go to a bigger tire size and you do not re-gear, because the computer itself cannot be flashed, so it will never know it's on the bigger tire or the new gears anyway. Just if anyone wants any 4XE info for today. Okay, let's see. I got off subject. Thank you. 75 is fast for my box on wheels. So I'm not a big, fast driver either. I enjoy driving my Jeep. So I enjoy driving my Jeep in the slow lane at 70, 75, cruising along. I have no problem with that. All right, let's see. Do we need to re-gear the front? Natalie, great question. So anytime we re-gear, you're going to re-gear the front axle and the rear axle at the same time. You want to make sure that both the front axle and the rear axle have the same gear ratio, so they're working together. If you like, say you only re-geared the back and it was a 456, you didn't re-gear the front, it was a 410. The vehicle is not going to drive correctly, and you're going to end up damaging the differentials and the gears, and you'll have some issues because they need to be balanced so that they're working together correctly. But that is a great question, Natalie. Let's see, 2019 JLU, 488, 35s daily, and 37 off-road. Very happy. Yes, Sue, that is such a great setup. Love it. I love seeing you on here. I feel like I haven't seen you for a while. So, and Sue has an amazing setup. She is so humble, but Sue has one heck of an amazing Jeep build. Holy moly. So, Sue, you'll have to share some pictures in the group for everybody if you don't mind, because your Jeep is absolutely spectacular. All right, ladies, I kept you a little longer today. I do apologize. Next week, we will be here same time, so 3 p.m. Eastern time, Wednesday. We are going to be driving into our next phase, kind of keeping with the everything gears. We're going to be talking about carriers, and we're going to be talking about specific differentials. So we'll be talking about lockers. We'll be talking about limited slip. We'll be going in depth into those three things. Again, I try to keep one subject so I can keep our cup of coffee with Kristin short on Wednesday. There are certain subjects like today when we're talking about gear ratios and re-gearing, we are just going to be on longer because there's just so much to share. So I thank you for spending this extra long coffee break with me today. I love jumping into the mechanics, sharing with you amazing ladies. Don't forget, if you do have any questions, make sure to drop them in the group so that I can help make sure everything gets answered. Another thing, if you haven't signed up yet, we are only a couple days away from our 2-day online workshop weekend where we are going to be going over so much goodness. 2 full days, 5 different subjects. So we will be talking about building your Jeep. We'll be talking about mechanical and tech. So if you haven't checked it out yet, jump over to ladyjeepers.com. There's information on there where you can sign up if you haven't grabbed a seat yet. I will do a couple more reminders since we're getting closer. Another thing, so excited, so excited. If you have not checked out the Lady Jeepers app yet, so as I know you ladies know, big part of ladyjeepers.com is the educational part of owning a Jeep. So like we went over today, but more in depth, trying to cover everything related with the Jeep journey. I know most of you amazing ladies I see on here are our members already. I love it. But if you are not an educational member yet, I'm so excited. We have announced our Lady Jeepers app. If you're already a member, just jump over to either the Apple Store or Android, download just put in ladyjeepers.com, download the app. You'll just use the exact same login you do for your membership to get into the member portal, like on the website. If you have any problems, shoot us a message. Just shoot us an email. And we will jump in and help to make sure you get in there because I'm so excited about this app. Oh my goodness. So if you haven't checked it out, it's really easy to remember. ladyjeepers.com/app. Totally easy. And it's on the homepage too at ladyjeepers.com. So if you want to learn more, if you enjoyed what you watched today, this is a little piece of everything we have in there waiting for you, plus the new community that we've created in there. I'm so excited about so much goodness. So if you haven't checked it out yet, jump over to ladyjeepers.com, check out our upcoming 2-day workshop event where we have so much in depth we're going to cover together. Grab your seat. And if you have not already, jump over to ladyjeepers.com, check out the new app. There's some new surprises coming that we're working on inside the app too. So excited. So excited. I'm kind of working on getting us onto a private platform where we can control who sees what and who's in there. And all of the fun things. So I am excited. Thank you for spending the day with me and a long cup of coffee. Next week, I will keep it a little shorter, but next week will be fun. Again, we're diving into the mechanics. So there's so much to learn, so much to share. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Shoot an email to custserve, CUSTSERV at ladyjeepers.com or jump over to our website, ladyjeepers.com. You can email us from there, check out what we have going on, or drop a question in the group so we can help. Thank you again, ladies. I had a great time. Great coffee break. Love sharing the information. I can't wait to see you next Wednesday. So mark your calendar every Wednesday. Oh my gosh, every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, right here live. And we will be doing Cup of Coffee with Kristin and going over more information, Jeep knowledge, and education together. So have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday, midday. I hope the rest of the week is fantastic. I hope it's going to be beautiful. Maybe you even have some Jeep plans. It's pretty awesome. And if not, join me this weekend for an amazing 2-day event together. Oh, thank you, Amy. I appreciate it so much. All right, ladies, I'm going to let you go. I will see you again soon. Bye, everybody.